I am. Welcome to the second Public Conversations for Change Leadership Fellowship Community Assembly. That's a lot of words, but it's good to say. We welcome you here this morning so you can begin to see the journey that we have embarked on for a whole year just about. And so we're excited that you were able to join us for that. So let's get started. Next slide. And then, on the screen, you can see all of our wonderful partners. I forgot to say, all of our wonderful partners that have partnered with us to this journey. What I want us to start with this morning is wonderful check-in. And while we're checking in, I'm going to ask us to participate in some grounding and breathing as you're checking in. What community or organization are you representing today? And how are you feeling, right? And while you're doing that, take some deep breaths. Breathing slowly but deep, and just ground yourself in the chair, which will really get you to really tap into how you're feeling. Write your responses in the chat box and let us know how and what's happening. Come on, let's check in. Loving it. Let's see what we have. Camilla, good to see you.
Very happy to be back. I've missed you all.
Yes, we miss you. I see the excitement in your face and in your words. Yes. Johanna, my partner, feeling excited and breathing in the work. See, that's what I like. Breathing in the work that has been done. That's good. Feed off of that. Frank. Oh, Staten Island SIUH. That's my people out there, my community health folks.
That's us. How you doing?
Yes, how are you? How are you?
Reverend.
Excellent. Somebody's feeling great. Yes. That's senior, so that's a graduation coming. So that's why you're feeling great. Yeah. I get it. Yes. This is good. I see the greatness. Somebody excited. Somebody put excited, really excited in this. So somebody is shouting that out. This is really exciting. And as we're feeding off of each other, reading the chat, even if you're not in the excited mood, you can look in the chat, you can feel it, you can start to embrace it and start to connect with it. Next slide, Catherine. As we're moving, we get into congratulations that are happening. So a practice that we do here at the wonderful PCCLF is that we do a land acknowledgement. So I'm just going to do that so that you can see us practice that. So the College of Staten Island is on the island known as Aquahonga-Macnoa, the homeland of the Lenape people. And PCCLF pays respect to the original stewards of this land, Lenape and other indigenous people, and it's committed to supporting the intertribal Native Americans, First Nations, and indigenous communities that continue to thrive in New York City. So this acknowledgement, what it does is it demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, and it reminds us of our important connection to this land, where we live, where we learn, and where we work. We recognize, honor, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and water on which we are now present. And so for you, if you want to find out more about what land you're on. You can text your zip code to 907-312-5085, and you'll get that information. Or you can visit https://native-land.ca/. And so we are so excited for you to be here, and I'm seeing a lot of movement going on and sharing in the chat. This is awesome. Keep that going. Next slide, Cap. So just so you could see, again, our sentiment axis. And so it usually begins like this. My name is Paul. Good morning. I'm an African-American Black male, gray hair from the top of my head all around my face. I'm wearing a brown shirt that has some rust prints on it. And in my background, I have the wonderful Staten Island Ferry. You can see the Statue of Liberty and the wonderful border that's there. And so what we do is you announce your name when you begin speaking. This is Paul, like I said. If you're sharing a picture, a visual, we ask that we kind of describe what's happening, and so people who see differently will also feel a part of the conversation. And also literacy moments, which is as we're talking, you can feel free to stop us at any point. If you're unfamiliar with any of the terminology that we're using or any of the language, if we see us use some acronyms that you don't know, you can type in the chat and let us know so we can make sure that everyone is on the same learning curve. And it's just a real literacy moment for us all. And then if you can also access the closed captions through Zoom. Next slide. So this is our agenda for today, right? We have a lot of exciting things. So we've begun our wonderful opening, and then we're going to move into our introduction to the PCCLF. We'll hear from one of our great leaders, Dr. Myra Lopez-Humphreys, and then you move into some of the wonderful presentations of some of the beautiful solutions that some were started last in the first season, some are beginning in this season. And then we get to hear from you, right? We get some community voices to kind of talk to us about how you see this moving forward, how would you like to add to it, and then we'll have our closing remarks. In this whole process, it's going to be so exciting. You're going to feel glued to your computer screen or your phone screen or whatever that you're on. You may not want to leave because there's so much wonderful things happening, but we just ask that you please respect and listen to your body. And if your body asks for breaks, feel free to take those breaks as necessary. Catherine, take us through. And so I'm just going to begin this piece because Dr. Humphreys will come in and really take us through the process. But just we're beginning for those who are being introduced to the PCCLF for the first time. We're going to take you on a little journey of our path, of our beginning from season 1. We're now in season 2, heading into season 3. And what we how we really began this discussion was how do we really begin to create equitable outcomes for all members of our community? That's the big question that, as we talk about in academia, we always have this wonderful research question that we're trying to answer. So the question is, how do we create this space that people feel that they're part of the community? Well, we really begin to see that we can start by listening to people and defining people by not what's wrong, right, but by their aspirations. What do they want? How might we? And not their challenging. And so this kind of framing comes out of Travian Shorters, who's a social entrepreneur and a lead thinker in asset framing. And so Dr. Myra Humphreys is going to take us through this asset framing and then move us into our discussion about the PCCLF journey. Dr. Humphreys?
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our second Public Conversations Community Assembly. I'm excited to be here, as many of you said. My name is Myra Humphreys. I'm an associate professor at the College of Staten Island. I have brown hair, I have brown eyes. I identify as Latina. I'm a woman. My pronouns are she, her, have glasses, and my background, you can see I have a sign that says, "We believe you belong here." And that's a big part of what we work towards creating in our space, but also on Staten Island. So thank you for being here with us today. And we you know, we want to also let you know that our community of practice, the PCCLF is part of the Equity and Belonging Project, and all of our work is sponsored by the Department of Social Work at the College of Staten Island, and also the Rivera Fund for Disability Studies and Social Work. And so we're here because of their support. So we want to let you know a little bit about that. And as we go on to hear about the beautiful solutions that our pods will share with you today, amazing work. I'm so excited to hear from everyone. And, you know, these beautiful solutions are really a reminder that Staten Island is not a single story. And that the work that we do in creating beautiful solutions is to work towards making that healthier and a place where everyone's well-being is considered and celebrated. And so we wanted to begin by following in Trabian Shorter's words about what it takes to define a people, that we're not just defined by our challenges, but by our aspirations and the wonderful things that we find in Staten Island. And so we wanted to share some compelling assets that many of you probably already know about the history of Staten Island, but we want to start with framing the assets that we all celebrate and have come up a lot in the work that we do. Next slide. So we're going to asset frame with Staten Island, and in the first picture, you'll see that on the southern end, of course, of Staten Island, you can find Sandy Ground, and many of you know, Sandy Ground is a community that was built by free Blacks who came to Staten Island decades before the Civil War, and Sandy Ground is one of the oldest continuously inhabited free Black settlements in North America. And so we have this space right on our island, and this picture is by the Alice Austin collection. And if you know the name, the RZA, the GZA, the ODB, Method Man, if you are familiar with this, then you know the world-renowned hip-hop group Wu-Tang Clan that is formed and is from Staten Island, right? Cash rules everything around me. And so we're celebrating the art and the music that comes from Staten Island as well. Next slide. Many of us have talked about in the work, and we see it coming up a lot in places that people find belonging in. Staten Island is known as the greenest borough with well over 170 parks, and this includes over 12,000 acres of protected land. And when we think about graduates of Staten Island, the borough of Staten Island has residents with a high school diploma, highest share of any borough. We'll move to the next slide. We'll actually skip it. I think we're gonna move on. We really want to be conscious of time. So we're celebrating Staten Island, and we also, in that celebration of truth, we also want to center the truth about why we're here to build on that and work towards addressing social exclusion and inequities that are experienced, that have not only happened in history, but continue to morph in different ways. And what is unique about the geography of the Staten Island and how the proximity of water around it has almost sometimes worked as a moat in creating exclusion and dividing people from access to well-being and equity. So if we think about the abuses and the cruelties that occurred in the largest mental institution in the history of the United States, the Willowbrook State School, and that's where our college is currently on. We're reminded of, you know, how these social inequities have impacted not only our history, but continue in different ways. If we look at the divide between Staten Island's north and south, which runs deep, so much so that in the surveys that we've been looking at, and also in our discussions in the PCCLF, residents have referred to the borough's expressway as the Mason-Dixon line. And next slide. Thank you. And so when we're thinking about these social exclusions, the way that the island is socially excluded, and also the inequities that come out of that social exclusion. There are different ways that that looks, and this can be evident. We can look at the next slide. In different ways that social exclusion and inequity is measured, whether it's in income inequality, outgroup violence, rates of incarceration, immigration policy, anti-discrimination laws, and political representation. So just a couple of examples, and many of you probably have known this in different ways. We may not say it this way, but the South Shore is Staten Island's poorest district, and also has one of the lowest rates of labor participation in New York City. 73% of North Shore residents are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And New York City's 5 boroughs, Staten Island's residents with disabilities have the highest employment gap, over 40%. And public transportation is a critical barrier to access to employment. And so Staten Island also has the lowest ridership of public transportation. And so these issues of access connect also to income equality. And next slide. And when we think about Staten Island and barriers to equity and belonging, much of the work in the PCCLF has started when we consider and we think about in 2014, Staten Island received widespread attention when Eric Garner, a 43-year-old Black male North Shore resident, father of 6, was tragically killed in an act of homicide by a New York City police officer. And Garner's story embodies the experiences and identities as a Black man contending with employment discrimination, as a disabled person by obesity and chronic asthma, and also by the experience of being a man looking for employment and being marginalized from traditional labor markets. We look at this story as the foundation of PCCLF seeking to understand and addressing the intersectional impact of structural racism, classism, and ableism on Staten Island. And so applying a disability justice framework for our planning team has been a big part of how we've thought about the work and beginning to ask ourselves a few questions. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So what are the harms that historically stigmatized bodies experience when we think about systems, and how do we work to enable and sustain health and equality for all bodies? What are we not seeing, and what's missing, or what's getting in the way of all bodies being able to access well-being and belonging? And so those questions really centered what we began to think of as a statement of opportunity. And Dr. Archibald is going to talk a little bit about that statement of opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Myra, for that. So let's look at that. In terms of a lot of times, like we just heard about some of the assets and some of the challenges, but what we look for in this work that we're doing is, what is the opportunity that we have? Okay, and so Staten Island itself, as Myra was just talking about, has plenty of assets. One of those assets is this constellation, this grouping of human service and advocacy group organizations that are doing some real ground roots advocacy efforts across the island for people who have been historically stigmatized. And so there's also this diversity shift that is occurring in race and ethnicity across the entire Staten Island population. We're not going at this work not understanding that there is a level and a high level of mistrust and distrust, right? Not just because people are thinking, who are you to come into our communities and tell us about these changes, right? How can you tell us what we need in our neighborhoods? And so as you begin to hear some of the presentations that are coming out of the pods, you will see how there's this real alignment between the work in the PCCLF and people directly in communities. So this is not work that's being done without, right? This is for us, by us type of work. And so you begin to see how spaces can come together collaboratively to really build up partnerships, right? That's really gonna create, right? And co-create, because it's not a creation individually, it's a co-creation collaboratively to really begin to foster this belonging and really going after, we're working hard to destroy, right? The harms that have impacted historically marginalized populations on Staten Island. Next slide. So how do we begin to do that, right? What do we begin to do? So this is how we began the process. The first thing you need to do is you need to get some information. A lot of times people go into communities without asking what is happening there. So we started that process, and it's still ongoing. We've been embarking on a community survey now. It's going into a second year, excuse me, of collecting this data. And so you still have a great time, excuse me, you still have a great time to still participate in this. And again, this is Paul. I forgot my beginning. This is Paul, black male, gray hair, top of head on the side, a brown shirt with Russ printing. And so here on the screen, as you begin to see, we have a diagram with some arrows going in it, and in the specific ecosystem diagram is a picture of a family. And then we have different images of public health, images for buildings. We have community-based organizations, academic institutions. These are all the different organizations that we could use to begin to build this ecosystem of equity and belonging on the island. And so as I was stating, we started with a community survey. And so this is still happening. And so we'll make sure that that also goes into the chat. So you can, for those who may not have participated in the survey, can still participate in the survey. The survey helps us to get perceptions from the community about what's their view on equity and belonging on the island, really at the intersection of race, ethnicity, and disability. But then we also have this community of practice, which is what you're watching some of the information and the work that we've done in that community of practice, which is the Public Conversation for Change Leadership Fellowship. And this is a diverse community of practice. We're sharing networks, knowledge, stories, and experience, and really trying to cultivate a thriving environment. And then we have this wonderful community of emerging leaders, which we began this year. We have this emerging leaders, which you'll hear about, for equity and belonging on Staten Island. This is really to build up leadership for people who don't normally have access to this type of information, by providing participants an opportunity to grow, learn, discover, and be energized about leadership opportunities on the island. Next slide. So as you begin to think about all of those different things that we're talking about, one of the ways that it's being done is in what we call pods, right? So your hair's talking about the pod. Like I'm a part of the Great Language Pod. And so when you think of pods, right, you think of pods in terms of seeds, right? And then how they flower, you know, and grow things. And so I want you to think about it. So these are the different type of pods. We have the Emerging Leaders Pilot. You'll hear from them later today. This is our newest pod that's come out. This is really providing a platform for young adults and people who may not have access to really begin their process. We have the Healing Arch. This is a public art installation kind of information that you'll hear a little bit more about some of this work that's happening. Our wonderful Ted and his group, he'll talk about some of this. We have the Language Access Pod, which is a part of myself. We have wonderful Johanna who's here, Crystal, so you'll hear from us. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And you have the College and Career Pipeline for immigrant families. That's really, really happening. What's interesting about some of this work that's happening that came out of this pod work is this one is a partnership between CSI and Lacomeno with Arlette. And this College and Career Pipeline is really a supportive pathway to CSI's continuing education and degree-bearing programs. And so you can see these are just a snapshot of some of the things that have come out of the work that's happening at PCCLF. Next slide. Excuse me. And then here's a little bit more because we wanted you to kind of see this stuff. We had the Research Collaborative Staten Island Equity and Belonging Study. Dr. Humphreys, she was granted a Distinguished CUNY Fellow Award to really advance this work and really study it. So she's really been able to get some graduate students to kind of help us to pull together some of this data that we've been collecting and analyzing. So look for that. That's going to be coming out soon. Again, we have the chassis and the partnership with Parks. This is Joanne Vacara she's also PCCLF, and partnership with Parks with Ted again, building a bridge of collaboration. We have Celebrating Places of Belonging in Staten Island. This is a photo documentary project that was done by Arlette Cepeda from PCCLF. I mean, this uses a tool for transformational social change on Staten Island. It took place in the fall, summer and fall of, it's going to, take place in the summer and fall of 2022. I want you to be looking for that. It's going to be Celebrating some Places. Dr. Humphrey is going to be helping with that. It's going to be an exhibition at the Pride Center with Lisa Sloan from PCCLF and hopefully some other venues that'll show up. And we have DAA, the Disability Action Advocates, right? It's a collaborative, it's a diverse advocacy group with a focus on issues impacting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have Alexa Donnelly from PCCLF, Cole, who's also from PCCLF, that are co-coordinators of the DAA. And so this year, the DAA partnered with Self-Advocacy Association of New York City to train advocates on self-advocacy and how to support people with IDD to advocate for their needs. So we're giving you just some of the things that are coming, next slide, Catherine, some of the things that are coming out of the PCCF. And so how do we begin to really build this culture of equity and belonging on Staten Island? Well, first thing, right? We have to engage people from different walks of life, right? We need all the stakeholders involved. We need me, we need you, we need everyone, right? So we're looking for self-advocates, artists, college students, human service professionals, educators, people in academia, people who are not. And what we're beginning to do, we come together to envision and then talk about what do we see in the future, right? We know what happened in the past, we know what's happening in the present, but what do we want, right? How might we? And then two, we begin to build and move around power, right? So we start to look to see what the power is, grab it, and start to move it around. And so that's how that's happening, okay? And then we create beautiful solutions, right? But in the beautiful solutions, we're creating beautiful solutions that we know will be sustainable. That's going to be, we can pass them on from generation to generation. That's going to create these conditions for change across the island. Next slide. How do we do it, right? Dr. Humphreys gave us a good snapshot about that. So the first thing is we need to hear from people, hear from us. One of the greatest data collection is story from the voice, right? Empowerment is the voice and choice. So story circles. We start hearing what's happened. Then we begin to map out of those stories, where are the centralized opportunities for change? What are the things that we can do by looking at what's happening in the different communities? And then we begin to look at our own identity and our own position in society on Staten Island and how other people perceive their identity and their position. And then we begin, like we stated in the slide before, we see where those powers are and we start to redistribute those powers. Then we begin, like we have our participant, we have a toolkit because now people need to know what are the resources, what is happening on the island, and where can we go get it? How can we join in? How can we connect? So we create this open source toolkit so we can begin to think about our how might we? How might we? And you'll see how that shows up when the pods are doing their presentations, because we move from our how might we to really developing what we call a beautiful solution. Next slide, Kathy. So you'll see how this plays itself out by what we're going to be doing today. So the pods are going to come and they're going to begin to present 5 to 8 minutes. And then as you're hearing how they're presenting and you're seeing how you're going to ask a question, you can put those in the chat. And when we get to the community voice in, we can begin to talk about some of those questions you may have, and then we'll move into the closing. Next slide. And so the order of that today, first you're going to begin with our newest and exciting group. Emerging leaders will go first, and then victim survivor pod will come behind them, following language access pod, then belonging on Staten Island, pod magenta, hope picturing alternatives, and then pod canary, foster community wellness in new public spaces. And then we're going to our community voicing. So we're going to hear from our emerging leaders pod.